Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Hello, everybody from all over the world today. We've got a bunch of folks joining from all over the place, and we're really excited to be here with you today to really focus in on a topic that's come up a number of different times with not just clients, but conversations that I recently had this week, by the way, at the SAP Insider event, which was fantastic. And I encourage you all to go check that out online and watch some of the videos that are there if you can. But it was a great event, and I look forward to more of these events coming. But for today, we have a great virtual event. I am joined by my colleagues here. I'll introduce each one of them quickly since it's about asking the experts. So let me introduce the experts. We'll just kind of go in order, so don't be offended, anyone. I'm just going to pick the order here because you're on a list. So good morning, Jacek, and welcome again to our Ask the Experts. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, good morning, John, and good morning, everyone, and good evening, depending where you are.
Yeah, and Jacek, since you've joined, I'm not going to spend too much time introducing you. Of course, you're the director, our services director, kind of lead the overall approach and what we're doing, and have been spending a lot of time on RevRec across many of our different clients. So thank you for your time.
Absolutely.
A couple of new people I'd like to introduce. I'll introduce Richard. Richard, welcome. You and I have been working together now for a long time, 6 or 7 years. I'm excited to have you here because you're working on one of our big projects real time that's dealing with some of these data issues. So welcome.
Well, thank you, John. And yes, hello, everybody. My name is Richard Craning. I'm a senior SAP consultant.
Awesome. And then finally, Ruma. Ruma and I have been working together a while now across many big projects, including Hewlett Packard, AITX. Currently, Ruma, you are working at one of our biggest clients, Siemens/Mentor Graphics, on a lot of the issues and opportunities they have on OCM. So welcome, Ruma.
Yeah, thank you, John, and thank you, everyone, for being here on this call. It's a pleasure. Yes, indeed, I've been working in program management here at Bramasol for several years. And as we speak, we do have go live happening for our data migration.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's exciting.
Pretty exciting. Pretty exciting.
Clients, yes.
Cool. Yeah, and I think, you know, after walking, we did speak, we've had a number of conversations. I think we are the leaders. We have several projects going on in OCM and data migration. And we're certainly, you know, have a lot more projects than most. Just a little bit of our housekeeping, our standard housekeeping. The session is being recorded. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar or check it out at the end. You know, you're free to ask those questions at the end too. And you can check out or download, see all of our other webinars. And you can do that a number of different ways by contacting us or going to bramasol.com. You can link to our resource center, check out our services and our resource center page, learn more about that. Of course, as always, Facebook, Apple, iTunes, LinkedIn, we're posting several posts every day, so we have a lot more information there. One other thing I'll encourage all of you to do is head on over to YouTube. We are building out our new YouTube channel. We've had it up there for a little while to help host these videos, but we are going to push those out to the public. This one will be available in a few weeks as we open it up and post it up there. But I just learned as we were going through our inventory, we have over 270 different videos, all about different areas, our key areas such as revenue recognition, finance transformation, treasury, and we have some great BRIM videos, customer videos. So go check those out. They are free. Sign up to be a subscriber. We've got well over 500 subscribers already. I'd love to get to 6,000, so please feel free to go ahead and join there. So with that, let's dive right into our subject. We're here to talk about data migration, and we thought this would be interesting because a number of our clients have really begun, and we've had a lot of talks with clients and prospects at Insider who are beginning the S/4HANA migration or beginning that whole process or changing their business models, and really have had wanted to get some expertise and insights on what do they need to do? What do they need to be thinking about? And the beauty of this is that we have 3 people on here who are in the midst of some pretty complicated and interesting data migration projects and programs, and hopefully we'll get some great insights from all of you. So we're going to have 3 main areas of focus, or several main areas of focus, really. I divided it up into 3 major buckets, but you can see 4 topics here. I'll ask Jacek maybe to touch on how did it work in the past. So Jacek, you can talk, if you can just talk a little bit about what happened, how did it work, and when I say in the past, in classic contract management, in ECC. Richard, clearly, you're working on a project that has some of those implications, so we'll ask for some of the things you see there. Then we'll talk about what's new with OCM, and Ruma is going to take us through and talk a little bit about that, with commentary from Richard and Jacek. We'll dive into some of the implications for S/4HANA, and then open it up any other topics that you might have. So with that, I'm going to turn to you quickly, Jacek, just to set the stage. We're talking about OCM. Why are we talking about OCM? There was something in the past we called classic contract management, ECC. Kind of set the stage just for a couple of minutes on that, if you could, please.
Sure. Thank you, John. So a little bit of history. Obviously, the SAP's RER solution has been around for a little bit. It's been rolled out to address the ASC 606 IFRS 15 requirements. At the time, it was not only a technology issue, but also a process issue, where companies had to either do a retrospective adaptation or a modified retrospective adaptation. For those who, back in the day, who've worked with this, you remember doing 605-based reporting, and then a dual reporting period of fiscal year, both on 605, 606 for in-flight contracts, then switching over to 606. It was very interesting time. For public companies specifically, that required continuity of information and continuity of business. For all in-flight transactions, you needed to reassess them under the new rules and continue posting both the old rules and the new rules for a certain period of time, post possibly a cumulative catch-up, which would be the difference between the accounting results under both the old rules versus the new rules, and so on and so forth. So the tool was designed to manage all of that. And because it was a complex situation, the tool also had some complex solutions for it. You had to reconcile all your incoming data. You had to have the tool in specific status formats to allow it to intake the data, process it before first fiscal period is posted. Your business pretty much was in a gray zone for a couple of weeks, in some unfortunate examples for maybe over weeks into months, where while you were still processing data into the tool, the revenue recognition tool, the tool itself wasn't posting. It was in what was called migration status. And that became a big topic for a lot of revenue recognition implementations with the SAP RER solution. Now, as we move forward, a couple of years after, everybody's pretty much already compliant. One way or another, you did that with SAP's RER or some other tool sets. And now we're in this space where moving to the tool is becoming more of a technology issue. You're moving to replace manual processes, or you're moving from ECC to S4, or you're upgrading. You did something with RER previously, now you're moving in new businesses into RER to consolidate. So SAP addressed that by making things easier, and Roma will go into that detail, but we are sort of out of that danger zone for migration where things were sort of on hold. You needed to run the old data in with transition periods. You needed to be in migration status, not process any new contracts until you finished. Again, the scary times and that danger is moving past us, both from a timing perspective. Again, everybody's compliant by now, as well as now from a technology perspective. We have new technology in the SAP RER tool itself, but allows us a little more flexibility, a little less risk to our project implementations.
That's great. Thank you, Jacek. And Richard, you're working currently on a project that is it's a hybrid. We're working in an S/4HANA environment, but it's using the old structures of classic contract management. And I know we want to focus on OCM, but I thought it would be interesting if you could just bring up some of the considerations that you think as you're doing a lot of the hands-on strategy and the work with this area to share with our guests, if you will?
Well, thank you, John. I was listening to Jacek there, and he was talking about the statuses of the system when we put the system in status migration to actually move the data in, the migration data in, and that's what we're doing now. So we're dealing with company codes and migration statuses of the system from migration to productive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things that you're really keeping an eye on, right? There's always, I don't want to say issues and challenges, but there are always key indicators that you want to keep an eye on as you're going through that process, and items you want to think about in advance. What would you advise our audience to think about?
Well, when we started this project that I'm working on now at the beginning of the year, we were looking at the standard data migration method. And through data profiling sessions and data analysis sessions, we came to arrive that we were going to implement a custom data migration strategy.
Okay.
So,
and what were some of the key decision criteria for that? What drove you in that direction?
The data didn't align correctly.
Haha.
So standard tool couldn't just cruise through and do what it's supposed to do. If you didn't have reference fields and there were manual data or general ledgers coming from external sources, so we had to implement and create a custom data migration strategy.
Got it. So those workshops that you had in the beginning, earlier in the process, were crucial also to determine your data migration strategy and realize that you maybe had some data challenge, which by the way we talked about in our last Ask the Experts, right?
Yeah, there was a very much complexities with the data here, so we had to identify the sources and all the characteristics of the data and what where they're coming from, and we did the analysis up front. So that did take some time.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Richard. So, Roma, we're going to talk. Let's pivot to OCM because that's what we're here about, and that's what I'm sure the audience wants to hear about. SAP continues. This is an example. Obviously, it's a high-speed train, and the reason I put the high-speed train I thought was interesting here was one of the reasons. SAP, as Jacek so well pointed out, continues to improve and add functionality and features to revenue accounting, RAR in particular. Of course, they have cloud-based solutions such as EBRR and CBRR, which is a subject of a webinar next week. But OCM came out because of these high speed, but also high volume and as improvements. So maybe you can just take a moment. What is OCM? What is OIP? We love acronyms here. What the heck are they, and why do I care?
So SAP Optimized Contract Management is what OCM stands for. And basically what it does is basically it increases the speed at which you can do the RAR contract management. And if I want to pivot back to RAR data migration, I'll give you a picture in my current client. We actually did the data migration using CCM about 1.5 years ago. And the entire RAR data migration part took about an entire week. Okay, and that's very inconvenient because what happens is during that 1 week, you have sales orders coming in. They are getting processed, but they're not getting processed through RAR, so they're getting held up there for the entire 1 week while we are doing the RAR data migration. And then at the end of the week, then you can move the sales orders through the RAR process. So there was a pretty extensive number of steps that we had to execute in a certain sequence in order to make that happen. And like Jacek mentioned, we had to put we had to change the status of the system from productive back to the migration status in RAR in order for us to execute the RAR data migration. So if I can say in optimized contract management, when you do the RER data migration, one of the biggest advantages is that you do not have to put the status into the migration status. You can keep SAP in the productive status while you're doing the RER data migration. So that is one of the biggest advantage that I can see for the migration using the OCM. What this can also help is another thing is that in the previous migration, when we did it in the CCM module, we had to do all the migration at a particular time shot, right? So we had to migrate all the orders that were there in our legacy system all at the same time. And so, you know, it involved a whole lot of testing that needed to be done. It was a very time-consuming process. Here, when I'm doing, in my current client, we're actually doing data migration using OCM. The other advantage we have now is we can process order in small batches. So we don't have to migrate. Let's say if you have 1,000 orders that you're migrating, you don't have to migrate all 1,000 orders on the first day. You can migrate 50, you can migrate 20, you can keep migrating the sales orders as long as your business allows, you know, the time frame that the business has, maybe a couple of months. Over a couple of months, you can migrate all your sales orders. So that is one big advantage of going through this OCM process. We have also found that in the OCM process, the steps themselves are lesser. So for example, like I think Jacek briefly mentioned it, we have to move it through the migration steps, and we had a couple of steps like transition, and then you could do the postings. Here with OCM, one of the biggest advantages is that you do not need to move through several steps. You just have to, once you put the sales orders into RER through the existing standard SAP upload program, the system actually processes the orders all at once. The orders are processed and you can generate the report, you can validate the report, and then basically it's up to the business. The system will actually generate all your transition, catch-up postings, whatever. It'll give you that entire report all at one shot. You do not have to have the separate step of write processing, none of that. It's just one step of uploading the orders into RER, and then you have your report which shows you what your catch-up postings are going to be, and then the users can actually go in and post the journal entries using that report at whatever time they would like to do before the month end. So that, I think these are a couple of big advantages that I see in RER OCM.
Okay, great, thank you. And what were there any key, you know, you guys are obviously you're going through your go live, but were there other key things that you wanted to keep an eye on, or you would suggest people keep an eye on as you prepare for OCM?
As we prepare for OCM, we are one of the first few clients that went through the OCM, so we had some pains regarding the software itself, right? You know, we had to work with SAP. There were certain notes that needed to be implemented. So yes, we now have a very good idea of in which order the notes need to be implemented. So that's one thing that honestly, any client that's going to go with migration using OCM, they need to make sure that they are implementing the notes that SAP has recommended in a particular order. They follow the orders. I think SAP now has updated their documentation as well while working with us. So they should follow that particular order of implementing those notes prior to going in to executing the migration. So I would say keep an eye on that. And then I think that was a major hurdle for us. The rest of it does not seem to be very different from what we did last time, from the perspective of how we load the orders into RER or how we generate the report. But I don't think there is too much of a heartache while executing migration using OCM, other than making sure the setup is correct.
Okay, and thank you. Jacek, any thoughts on that? You know, what are some of the other main, you know, we also have optimized inbound processing. What is that?
Because, parsing is really just a simplification of the way data gets into the RER tool. And again, for those who have worked with what is now being called classic contract management and the classic version of the tool, there are some definite restrictions of the way of the formatting, what's required, which also were an issue in project implementations. A classic example of that is you're loading in data which has contracts that have been running for 3-4 years now. And in the last 3-4 years, you've done updates to your system, and a contract that's 3 years old might on surface look the same, but might actually be identical to the contract that was created, let's say 2 months ago. Some new fields were added, things are no longer consistent. And that was an issue with RER implementations in the past, where you needed to look at that data consistency and update existing data. The rules right now become relaxed with optimizing about processing, and I think that's the important takeaway here. Going back to John, I'm going to go back to what Ruma was talking about in terms of timing. Sort of the key takeaway there is you have to think how much risk that reduces for your implementations and your project planning. Again, the reporting standard is a quarterly reporting standard. As Bramasol, as well as other implementers, have always recommended going live at the end of a fiscal quarter, so the business can report and close one quarter on the current processes, and then start a new quarter on the RER processes and report that, and obviously also issue disclosures completely in RER. So the business side of the company doesn't have to worry about tracking one fiscal quarter, half on old process, half on new process with different data models and so on and so forth. Well, that sounds great until you realize that you're trying to go live during the quarter end, which is usually a very stressful process of time for everybody involved. Now, with a relaxation of the timing with OCM, that risk again and that stress is reduced. You don't have to do all of these things and also close a quarter all within the span of 1 or 2 weeks. You can take your time. You can take your time importing legacy data and catch up. You've already closed your quarter. You made sure all the new contracts are flowing into the system. Now you can go back, look at the old quarter's numbers, and start importing the data in. That's an important piece for an implementation planning. It involves IT, business, all around everybody in terms of the timing and the stress that's involved in go live of RER solutions.
Okay, there's a couple of quick questions here. One of them I think addresses what you were just talking about, which is the question is that what challenges can we see in case we do migration of after the new transactions start flowing, OCM versus CCM? And I think you hit on that, which is, and maybe you can just re-emphasize, but the whole idea of you can do a go live, get all of your new transactions going, and then catch up, if you will, afterwards. Are there any issues with that?
There might be, and I'll let Ruma also add to it because she's sort of living the situation right now. But you have to always keep in mind that when we say new transactions, it doesn't mean just new orders, but also means new events or billings at existing orders.
Right.
So unfortunately, if you have an order that's in flight, and let's say you do a weekly delivery on it for some, that's your scenario. You do a weekly delivery of some quantity, and you also do, let's say, a monthly billing. If you are migrating that order in, and you wait for more than 1 month, then those events that happened, they really cannot go into RER because they need to wait for the legacy data to come in. So some of these in-flight transactions that have continuous activity on them, that was the case with Classic, and it is still the case here. That continuous activity is captured by the system, as in it doesn't disappear, but it isn't accounted for until the rest of the legacy data for that particular contract or order comes in. So you need to plan accordingly. If your scenario is fairly easy, where, for example, you bill everything up front and then it's just a continuous execution of a contract, or maybe you bill annually, then you really don't need to deal with that stress, because if you bring in your data, let's say a month and a half later, you're not losing anything. The system will catch up. But if you do have frequent operations on the in-flight data, a delay, regardless of which version of RER you're going live with, a delay needs to be sort of managed around, because that data will not go into the system in real time. Ruma, I'm going to sort of let you add it, because I think you're dealing with a lot of this right now.
Not yet. We are in the go live. So I will know the experience after. Yeah, as far when we did the testing, I don't think that our business had too much of concerns on this front, other than what you have already mentioned just now.
Yeah. Hey, let me reach out to Richard for a second. Richard, you talked in the beginning about the importance of the planning ahead. Is that something that the client and that you would recommend, as part of thinking through your data strategy and your migration strategy? Is what really are the frequency and the nature of the changes and updates to those and billing for those POBs, quote unquote, and contracts?
I was listening to Jacek speak on that, and no, I don't think that comes into play as much for decisions up front. It's more your sources and where you're getting your data, what it looks like, how it's where it's coming from, and what state it's in to get into the system. I have a question for Ruma, which is, I'm dealing with the old method CCM, and again, we put the status into migration. The new data gets migrated into the system and it doesn't post. So with the new system, you said it's in the productive status, and you mentioned, how did you phrase that? Catch up, and how does that work?
For the orders that are getting migrated, or for new sales orders that are coming into the system?
No, migrated orders in the productive system, so they would have duplicate entries, right? I mean, in the current system, that's why we have it in migration statuses. So the data comes in and does not duplicate.
This is Jacek.
Sure.
So we're going to get into a little bit of weeds, and everybody in the audience, so enjoy that. A setting for a setting of source data for relevance to the RER solution is done in configuration, but the configuration only manages setting of that flag when that new order is created. You have to keep in mind that in-flight orders, let's say we're using SAP SD as the data source, in-flight orders don't have that setting. They're not relevant for RER. So the tools of initial load, operational load, which is RER migration tools that SAP has rolled out, and it's been around since version 1, part of those tools functionality is to set that setting. So if I have an in-flight order, but again, to my scenario I've mentioned in the past, let's say I bill every month or maybe every week, I deliver something and I create a billing every month. That order will continue operation, although you deployed RER, you went productive on it, but until you process that particular order through the initial load, operational load processing, none of the activity related to that order is seen by RER. Only when you process that order through those, does that order get tagged as being relevant to RER, and only at that time, all relevant activities such as billings and deliveries also get tagged as being relevant. Right? So you don't really lose in-flight data, or you don't have double postings. If one of the examples, but it's also been around since we started our journey with RER, is if you use classical SAP SD module-based revenue recognition, there are tools to make sure that you don't have double postings. So you don't, for example, run the SD module revenue recognition in the same month as you run an RER posting, so you double dip for revenue. There are actually tools to prevent that, and those are separate. But again, the OCM, the danger of making sure that you don't have things which are posted in RER but also been posted classical are eliminated by this flag that says you are not relevant for RER until you are, and then everything you do is relevant.
So that's a great point, Jacek, and thank Richard. Great question. But that goes to the next, to a little bit of the next topic on here, which is about but I'm not going to call it non-SAP data. Traditionally we know that RAR is built is built to handle SD. SD is the main way a lot of customers do all of that. But what about, I'm going to call them non-SD sources, right? You have, you certainly can use project systems, which will, there's some challenges with that, but also SOM, right? So if you're in the BRIM portfolio and you're a high volume business like some of our clients, how do you deal with that, and how do you deal with non-SAP data, Jacek?
I'm sorry, John, was that from you or for Richard?
I was going to throw that to you,
Well, so non-SAP data, the tool has always been designed to handle non-SAP data, and it works very similarly in the classic and the optimized version. The key to non-SAP data is a reference ID or originating item ID, which is part of the data structure that's inbound. Mm-hmm. Part of core configuration of the RAR solution is whether whether revenue contracts should be created from contract data or could be created from other data, specifically invoice data. So it is possible for me to create a revenue contract only based on an invoice. The most widely used approach is to use contract data, meaning I have an inbound contract or inbound order. The RAR tool looks at that data, creates an appropriate revenue contract structure, and then waits for things to happen, such as billings, deliveries, passage of time for time-based performance obligations. So external data and the whole question of losing things perhaps in flight, if your configuration is driven by contract, as an order creates a revenue contract, that data needs to come in first and needs to set the foundation upon which everything else comes in. So if I were to turn RAR on and never send in order data for non-SAP source, such as, let's say I have an external system, let's pick Oracle, just as an example for an ERP. I have an external Oracle system that's supposed to send in data to revenue recognition. I forget that step. I don't send in the order data. I just send in the invoice upload file for orders, which are in Oracle originally. RAR will actually throw them out as an error because it will say, you're giving me invoice data, which I cannot relate to anything that I've created before, such as an order, a revenue contract. So it will actually error out and will not process that. So again, that's part of data validation incoming, and it works pretty much identically between OCM and CCM.
Okay, thank you for that. All right. How about some other considerations? And again, one of the areas that we've talked about is milestones and percent of complete. SAP has added, and I think they've added a ton of great features with regard to day-based calculations, with regard to suspend and continue to enrich and enhance, optimize contract management. But as you think of, if you're currently using classic contract management or classic RAR and you're moving to OCM on S for Hana, you need to kind of think about how you want to handle project systems, right, Jacek?
That's correct. And this is an SAP's product development choice where certain features that we saw in what's now being called classic contract management were not continued into optimized contract management. However, classic didn't go away. It was not discontinued. So we have clients who are exploring hybrid deployments, which means either certain scenarios or even certain legal entities, whole company codes, which have heavy interaction with the controlling module or project systems in this case, which is part of controlling. They will deploy on the classic contract management version of RAR, whereas other company codes which don't have that factor would deploy with OCM and take advantage of those. OCM in itself is still being developed. We have seen 1 or 2 only releases at this point. So absolutely, the project systems integration could be on a roadmap. And we're speaking to SAP, and as I'm sure everybody else is as well, and kind of trying to find out whether it is. There are obviously other considerations. There are other tools such as results analysis and so on that have complexity, which need to be taken into account. But yes, the mapping of functionality between OCM and CCM is not 100%, and each client needs to review their particular scenarios very carefully. And again, what we're seeing as a trend is this hybrid approach, as in I'll deploy both. I'll deploy CCM for certain scenarios or company codes and OCM for others, because OCM in itself does bring a lot of advantages.
Yep. And there are some standard, particularly with regard to BRIM integration and SOM, there are some standard tools out there. And with each client, we certainly can explore how those tools apply, but there are some fairly standard tools and processes, and they're getting upgraded and updated. In fact, we were just talking with SAP development the other day about that. So
that's correct. And the consumption fulfillment event and the integration to SOM is a big part of the functionality as being rolled out now with OCM, and because we are seeing increasing number of these scenarios and these deployments. To the comment I made when we opened the webinar, everybody's compliant by now. So what folks are looking at right now, it isn't, oh, I need to be compliant, I need to implement this tool for compliance. No, we're now really looking into optimizing our processes, whether elimination of manual, non-SAP tools, or better integration between our SAP tool sets such as BRIM and core S/4HANA.
So S/4HANA project considerations, as we dive into that room, I'm going to kind of, you've been watching a number of these, and you helped with, HP when we did HPE, and they did RAR first, and then into S/4HANA. That's the recommended way. I think that Mentor may have done it in that same methodology. What are your thoughts, and why does it make sense to kind of follow that process, do you think?
You mean from moving from ECC to S4 project?
Yeah, when you're thinking about, so, Jacek pointed out so let me clarify that question, made a great point. Most companies have complied, right? We have our own comply, optimize, transform. Most companies have complied, whether they're using spreadsheets or they're using some allegedly best practices or other cloud solutions, but really, they ask, and the question is, I'm starting an S/4HANA journey. Should I wait to do RAR later, or should I do it now? And of course, the SAP recommendation is do it now for lots of reasons. Do you agree? We've seen it in several different. Do you agree, and why does that make sense to you? And then maybe, Jacek, you can jump on that as well.
I have not seen, in this particular organization, I have, they start, the one that I have worked on, the HPE, the mentors, they have all started RAR right at the get-go. And one of the biggest things is that, with S/4HANA, the whole from between ECC and S/4HANA, as we all know, that the table structure, there's a lot of changes, right? So, I think, is your question, and maybe I'm not following your question correctly.
It's okay.
Are you saying that if a company had RAR in the ECC realm, are you saying that whether they should?
Quite the opposite, which is, hey, and there certainly are considerations. We're not going to, we'll do another webinar around considerations as you look at moving from ECC to S/4HANA, right? You can have a discussion of, hey, I'm on ECC, I have RAR 1.3, but I'm on SP2. Should I upgrade and then move to S/4HANA? There are a lot of considerations, and we'll have another one. No, this is more of, just in general, as you think of the data structures, as you think of the data and the issues and challenges with that, does it make sense to do RAR in ECC, get that all aligned, and then move to S/4HANA because there's lots of tools? It's simplified that way. Any thoughts on that? And if not, that's great. you know.
I think you know, it's a bigger picture that the company has to look at as to what they can accommodate.
Okay.
I have worked on projects where the company did not have RAR, and now they have moved to S4 and they are getting RAR. Also, there are companies which was an ECC and an RAR, and then they of course are moving into RAR and S4. And then also there are companies who never ever had RAR, and you know, they are planning to move to RAR in ECC before moving to RAR here. So all three considerations are there, and I think it's a bigger picture as to why a company chooses to do follow a particular process, a step, and you know, depends on what projects they have on hand. But I think SAP S4 HANA allows you to migrate whether you had RAR before in ECC, whether you had RAR before in S4 and in your prior S4 environment. So I don't think there is, I mean, you know, there is a bigger picture that to be considered. That's what I'm trying to say on whether you should move to RAR as you go to S4 right at the same time. Of course, SAP will always want to. So one of the things is that, you know, if you do everything from the get-go, you're dealing with less complication from the technical standpoint, I think.
Right.
But at the same time, the load of work might be a lot more because now you have to also consider, you know, take into consideration your go live timing, which also involves, you know, going live into RAR at the same time. So yeah, I mean, there are several considerations that need to be taken into the thought process before deciding what to do. So I think maybe that would be a bigger conversation to have.
It's fair. Okay.
Yeah.
Jessica, any thoughts from you on that?
On as for considerations?
Yeah, as for considerations of moving, you know, do you do RAR first in ECC, move to S4HANA? You know, we know what the recommendation approach is.
Well,
right?
yes. Well, the RAR in ECC before S4HANA is a recommendation from SAP and always has been. It stems from an assumption that if you are a classical SD RevRec user, the SD RevRec functionality is no longer available in S4HANA. So therefore, if you are following a brownfield approach of technical upgrade to S4, it is SAP's recommendation to deploy RAR first and then do a technical upgrade of the whole system, because when RAR just upgrades to the S4 version and you again you have continuity, you don't lose anything, you don't really switch technologies. Given all the functionality in RAR to manage migration from SD RevRec, it's absolutely possible to not miss a beat, to have an in-flight contract, successfully migrate into RAR, continue posting, and then do a technical upgrade to your system, and nothing skips. You don't have, you know, blackout periods, none of that. Now, as for considerations in OCM, SAP, as Ruma mentioned, has made a number of changes in OCM versus CCM in the underlying code. The point of those changes is to optimize, really. So if you are doing an OCM implementation and have looked at maybe RAR functionality with CCM, you should do a due diligence analysis of whether OCM still has what you looked at if you did a fit gap, for example. A lot of things are there, some things unfortunately are not, but as you also heard me say a couple minutes ago, it's still an evolving feature, a set of functionality of OCM as itself within RAR. So it's a changing picture. So all of these things you need to sort of throw into the mix and mix the pot and figure out what makes best sense for you as a client. And
sure.
And we, Bramasol, are always here to help you if you would like to ask us.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting follow-on question. I'm going to kind of take this one because I've heard you. I actually listen to you occasionally, Jacek. So that you know, so. But
so
one of the big yeah, go ahead.
Add here is that, and I think Jacek touched on it, and I think maybe that's a very good point, is that when you are going, if you're going to go for S4 migration using CCM or OCM, you have to really give a very good thought. I think that's what Jacek was trying to say.
Yes.
What SAP says is that once you migrate using your CCM version, then those particular list of contracts you cannot migrate using OCM. So if you have a, let's say, company code that you have several company codes within your organization, and you choose to migrate a particular company code using CCM, then again moving that over to OCM for those particular contracts which have been migrated using CCM into S4, that is extremely difficult, and they're not sure if there's a path for it. So that is one of the considerations that I think one needs to really make. Do you want to go in for OCM, S4 OCM in RAR, or to go for CCM? So I think a company need to really take care of that.
So somebody had asked that. So Ruma, you must be reading somebody's mind, because that was the exact question somebody just asked. If they migrate to CCM using CCM, do they have to remigrate now that they're going to do OCM in a, they're talking about a brownfield implementation. But the answer is it can be very challenging once you've migrated one way or another, correct?
Yes. And that's a very true statement. Yeah.
Okay. So hopefully that answered your question. It doesn't mean it can't be done. And if you want to follow up, certainly we can talk about some of the implications of that. But let us, we're happy to help you out. There is a question here about the average time it takes for a data migration for large-scale customers under OCM, and my favorite answer is depends. There is no average per se. We've seen it take a couple of weeks, and we've seen it take a couple of months. And part of the driving factor in that, and see, Jacek, if I get this right, is it's really not all about the actual physical migration or the tools or SAP and what happens from that perspective. Part of the migration process is the reconciliations and ensuring that you have the numbers right. And that requires that you have your business and your staff available to do those reconciliations, which will be the, as we say, the long pole in the tent, if you will, or the critical data path or the critical path on that. So it's a depends answer to that question. So.
Yeah, and that's an excellent answer, John. But one of the things is with OCM, the number of steps being much lower. So in CCM, you had to turn the system into migration stage, then transition stage, and at each stage, you have to validate that. And so that made the system, the whole process much longer. Whereas with OCM, you have just one step. You can keep your system productive, and you can just do your migration, and then you have reporting after that. And so really, and then the postings, the system does not do the transition postings. It's you who will post the manual journal entry. When I say you, I mean the business. So therefore, the whole process is really, the time has been cut down with OCM. But again, how many orders you have, and it all depends on how long your entire migration, like you mentioned, would take. In my case, like I'm doing a migration where we're doing in OCM, and we are doing several batches. So we're going to migrate over a month. Each time we are migrating, it's just a day. So we just, we do the migration, we take out the report, we hand it over to the client for review. And that's about it. Whereas when we did the CCM migration, it was a chunk of 8 whole days, because like you said, the business needed a couple of days in between each step to validate and give us a green signal to move to the next step. And yeah, so.
Wow, oh, that's great to know. Thank you. Hopefully that answers the question. So, all right. Any other, so as one of the things that you brought up, that we brought up is on that migration and all of that, also consider what we call the 4 dimensions here, which are your volume, velocity, density, and complexity, right? All of this is guided or is affected, if you will, by those 4 dimensions, right? How many are you talking about? Are we talking tens of thousands or tens of millions or hundreds of millions? do you want to do them in batches? Are you looking at doing them monthly, weekly? We have customers who do them daily, but there's a lot of consideration. So the velocity, the speed, so the volume and velocity, density. You can have fairly simplistic multi-element arrangements with 2 or 3 POBs attached to them, and those will be different, if you will, than some of our clients who've had, Jacek, I think hundreds, if not thousands, of POBs associated with an individual RA contract. And then, complexity. As you look at some of these new evolving, and we think of the digital solutions economy, these new evolving models that involve multiple, I'll call them payment models, but multiple business models that can include the purchase of a product or a piece of hardware, a purchase of a product along with software installation, and the software, and some is based on a flat fee and some is based on consumption models. Really, you have to think about how different elements are linked together. Do you have linked POBs? Do you have multiple nested relationships, I guess, is another thing that I would say people want to be careful about. And I don't know, Jacek, we're talking with that about several customers. Anything you wanted to maybe comment about that as well?
There's a lot to unpack for John. I think what I want to go back is maybe, this ties together with what Ruma said. And I need to go a little background. Again, RER was designed to take over from one accounting principle to another, and it calculated what was called the catch-up posting, and Ruma called it transition posting, and there are a few names for that. And it expected you to post that, and it wanted to post it itself sometimes into you need to define a special period. Long story short, it said if I have an in-flight contract, and if I being RER ran it from day one, here's where the revenue would stand. And that number might not be what the data that's inbound is telling it. Maybe inbound data says, no, we recognize $5. RER said, no, based upon my day calculations, I recognized $5.22. I have a catch-up posting of 22 cents I need to do. So to your, everything you just said, sort of, John, about complexity of these new orders. So now take that concept and go and sort of overlay it to a very complex order structure. You would have these catch-up postings and differences in calculation all over the place, because you might be going from a non-SAP or very manual or whatever toolset to an RER toolset, and RER is going to have its own opinion based upon the configuration you build into it of what the data should look like. With the removal of the posting, and now as Ruma said, that the OCM functionality expects you to do that posting, you have that control, meaning RER will design that complex structure that you just talked about, John, with various POBs depending where it's coming from, a large number of POBs, distribution of data, and so on. But it's not forcing you anymore to post what it thinks should be the catch-up. It allows you to do it. It just gives you its suggestion of here's what the number we think should be, which again makes for less stressful go live, right? Because if you don't agree with what RER wants to post, you don't have much of a choice because it wants to post it. But if now with OCM, you are given an option of just posting it manually, you are welcome to reassess that value manually and post whatever you need to post.
Right. Great. All right. So we're running out of time, and I thank all of you. I thank the audience, all of you, for participating and the great questions, as always. Jacek, Ruma, Richard, you guys are busy on projects, and I really appreciate you taking this much time out of your day to help answer some of our audience's questions and to share your thoughts and expertise. And as always, I thank all of you from the audience for your time and your great questions. Please feel free to follow up with us. Again, check us out on YouTube. There's lots of great information there. And we look forward to seeing you on yet another Ask the Expert session that's coming towards the end of August. Make it a great day, everybody, and thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot, John. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.